Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have one of the more popular guests on this show, Rick Maybury, with me once again. And to learn more about Rick's wonderful work, his great newsletter, it's earlywarningreport.com, earlywarningreport.com. He is the editor of U.S. and World Early Warning Report. For investors, it's a wonderful report that incorporates geopolitical happenings as well as history. I don't know of anybody that does a better job of relating the past to the future. You know, most people are just absolutely totally ignorant about history. They don't read. Their knowledge of history is what the statist institutions tell them it is, and a lot of times it's completely opposite of the truth. And so my advice to my listeners is twofold. Do a lot of reading on your own and subscribe to Rich Maybury's Early Warning Report, because if you don't have the time to read several thousand years worth of history, Rick has done that, and he passes it on to his listeners or to his subscribers on a regular basis, and he relates what's going on currently to the records of history. Well, we need to learn from the past, and Rick does a wonderful job of that. Thanks for joining me again, Rick.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thanks for those kind words. I appreciate it. Your newsletter, too. I always enjoy reading it, and I recommend it to people. I think it's essential.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say that. Well, we've titled today's show as Trump America's Last Chance for a 1776 Revival. Well, a former member of the CIA, Jim Rickards, he's been on this show a number of times, and we had him on once before the election, maybe a month or so before the election, and he suggested that this may be our country's last chance to keep from going over the edge. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think he thought that Trump would win, and a lot of us saw Hillary Clinton and what we've had over the last decades and said something needs to change. But I'd like to get your thoughts on the question that we posed for our show today. Is Trump America's last chance for a 1776 revival?
I wouldn't phrase it that way. I think as a last chance, I think it's probably more accurate to say that he will be the trigger for a 1776 revival. Because I think he's going to make a lot of mistakes, and I think he is revealing every day by his process of making economic and political and geopolitical policy by using 140-character tweets that he doesn't know what he's really doing. He has no idea. I heard someone on TV a few days ago make the very valid comment that a single tweet can move markets and start wars.
Oh, for sure.
And I don't think he understands that. He does not understand how much power he has. He is emperor of the world. He knows that, but I don't think he knows what it means. Oh. And he's experimenting with the whole planet, doing the things that he's doing in in my opinion, a very emotional, shoot from the hip kind of fashion. Things that he should sit down and think about and study and talk with experts on for weeks or months. He just shoots off a 140-character tweet and turns other people's lives upside down. And I think that he's going to do a lot of good things. He's going to be like Mussolini. He's going to make the trains run on time. And people will be really enthusiastic about that. And I think that enthusiasm will lead to economic boom. And so we're going to have 1 to 3 years, I would say, of pretty good times as that enthusiasm works its way all through the economy and people start new businesses, do things that require optimism. But he's going to turn over so many apple carts that it's going to, just like it did with Mussolini, it's going to lead to chaos. And then people will be so disgusted with government of all types that there really will be a genuine new 1776.
Interesting. Well, you make the point, Rick, that these tweets can really turn things upside down. When we think about it, the Federal Reserve weighs every word in their pronouncements very, very carefully. Mm-hmm. And a single word can move the Dow Jones up or down tremendously. And so I get your message. I think it's very, very true. The markets can do anything, and people can react and start wars, as you say. It's well, for example, the stuff he's saying about China, right? Kind of frightening.
Oh yeah, I mean he's just bought this idea wholesale that America is supposed to be policeman of the world, and that the South China Sea should not belong to China, and that America should do something about it. Well, America's got 10 aircraft carriers. That's it. That's all the aircraft carriers they have. And the Chinese, I mean, they're right there on the South China Sea. They can shoot from their bunkers all along the coast. Sending the U.S. Navy into the South China Sea to run China out of there would be suicidal to the Navy. There's just no way they could handle that. And yet he's just assuming that we not only have the right to tell the Chinese that they don't own the South China Sea, but that we have the right to take it away from them.
Yeah. Well, he's going to make America great again, he says, by building up our militaries and maybe building 100 of those carriers or whatever, those ships.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, there's one thing that he's demonstrated all through his career, and is still demonstrating now in office, is that he is really comfortable with debt. And I think that that's going to be the big thing to the economy, is this guy's going to spend money like nobody's ever spent it before. And he's going to have to print it to do that. We've already got a case where there's many trillions of dollars that's effectively stuffed in people's mattresses that they're keeping there because they're afraid to do anything else with it. And as the optimism rises, that money is going to come out of those mattresses and into the economy. And then if you, on top of that, add Trump's spending plans, what you get is hyperinflation. And I'm thinking, like I say, we'll have 1 to 3 years of really good times, but that's going to be ended by a runaway inflation.
Well, you talk a lot about velocity of money, and as I hear what you're saying here, Rick, you're talking about an increase probably in confidence as the economy picks up. We're certainly seeing a stock market that's rallied quite nicely since Trump. I mean, the immediate reaction when he was elected was not positive, but within a few hours it turned around, and we've had quite a run. And I could see that happening, perhaps, if people start getting confident and they start letting loose. And I would imagine also if we have interest rates rising, so the banks have a positive yield curve, mm-hmm. they'll start borrowing short and lending long, and in that way, probably increasing the indebtedness of getting some of that money off the balance sheets of banks and into the economy, and increasing the demand side of the economy, or to use a Keynesian notion. Mm-hmm. So. Do you see this then? I mean, there's tremendous amounts of debt that's still out there. Mm-hmm. And the debt, to me, is so deflationary, though, at the same time. But do you see then the possibility of overcoming that with some sort of a hyperinflation or rising levels of inflation? Of course, if we get hyperinflation, it destroys everything. Yep. Nothing can survive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do you see this playing out and ticking up with inflation? I noticed you provide a velocity measure in every one of your newsletters, and I mm-hmm. am fortunate to see your April letter. And as I look at it now, the velocity is still quite low, both in the United States and around the world. You measure it, U.S. velocity of the dollar and the estimated world velocity of the dollar. People still want to hold dollars, but I mean, why? I mean, we're printing. One of the things you pointed out in your letter is Americans, they sort of think that we got to go after China now, but when in fact it's the United States that's benefiting from this setup, not China. We print pieces of paper, and China gives us real stuff. What's wrong? I mean, why are we going against that, huh?
Yeah, that's like you say. That's on the first page of the February issue of Early Warning Report. This idea that we're being ripped off in this trade deficit thing that Trump worries about so much is really, really naive, because what a trade deficit means is that we're printing up these little slips of paper and we're sending them off to other countries, and people in those countries get those slips of paper and they send us back real stuff, like cars and computers and food and all sorts of things that they real stuff that they trade. And Trump is worried that these other countries are somehow ripping us off by sending us good stuff, and we sending them paper dollars. That's an example of what I think, how little he knows about real economics.
Yeah. I mean, most of the Keynesians, though, probably, well, I don't know. The Keynesians have not been uncomfortable with these massive chronic deficits in the United States year after year. And I guess, Rick, you and I would agree that if we hadn't gone off the gold standard, if we'd remained in some sort of a legitimate global monetary system, that we wouldn't have had this perpetual chronic trade deficit, right?
Right. Certainly, because you can't print gold on a printing press. You can't create it on a printing press. But beyond that, because you can't create gold out of thin air, if we were still on the gold standard, the government would not have been able to grow like it has. The printing of the money, paper inflation of the money supply, is just a big rip-off way for the government to steal what we have and to make itself grow. And if it was not able to do that because the money would be gold, then the government, I am convinced, would be, like 1/4 the size it is today, and we would be vastly more prosperous. The government wouldn't be, but the people would be vastly more prosperous, and we'd be in far, far better condition than we are today. So it's actually, I think it's fair to say that going off the gold standard was the setup for the new 1776 revolution that's on the way, because the revolution's essentially going to be a fight against unlimited government.
Yeah, the only thing is that the government has more and more tools to keep track of us and to put people down that might want to revolt against it, I guess. Oh, more than 1776, I'd say, wouldn't you? With all the electronic data and things, electronic? Huh?
Yes, definitely. Actually, in 1776, the advantage went to the colonists because the Pennsylvania flintlock rifle had been invented, and the British Army was still using the Brown Bess musket mostly, which didn't have a prayer against that rifle. And so the colonists had a tremendous military advantage in those days, which we no longer have. But one of the articles in the February Early Warning Report is about the fact that we need to start looking at the issue of troop loyalty. That's something Americans don't talk about, but rulers in other countries worry about it all the time. Are their troops really going to be loyal and put down whatever rebellions occur? And I think we're coming to the stage here where the American military, if it isn't already secretly, is questioning whether it really is supposed to be loyal to the Constitution or to the politicians. They're going to have to make a decision. Every soldier, every trigger puller is going to have to make a decision. Am I loyal to the country and the Constitution, or am I loyal to the politicians? And that's what will trigger off that rebellion.
Well, they take their oath of office, I believe, to the Constitution, not to the chief executive, not to the commander-in-chief, right?
That's right. The last I looked, the United States was still the only country in the world where people who work for the government take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, not the government.
Of course, the Constitution is in the mind of the beholder, it seems. The Supreme Court doesn't seem. The Supreme Court doesn't really seem to understand the Constitution either. If you take a literal interpretation of it, right?
Yeah, that's really true. The Supreme Court's done us a lot of damage, and a big part of that was the Great Depression and the Keynesian revolution in economics and all. The judges didn't know much about economics, and they just kind of took the attitude that there's no solution for this terrible economic crisis but to give the government more power. And so their dedication to the constraints of the Constitution pretty much went away for many decades. Now, with Scalia, we started coming back. And it could be that with Trump's appointments, it will continue coming back. They will follow in Scalia's footsteps. I really hope. That's probably the one way to avoid a real shooting revolution is to have the Supreme Court begin to go back in the direction of the true Constitution, the way Scalia was trying to do it.
Yeah, I wonder, though, if we have a president that doesn't understand the Constitution, whether, what his inclination will be. He's trying to make good on, perhaps now, on campaign promises to those that voted him in, but we'll see which way it goes. Richard, are you concerned? I mean, I read you talked an awful lot about trade in your February issue.
Yeah.
You concerned a lot about this trade rhetoric, this vitriolic anti-Chinese the words that are coming out of Trump's mouth, you mentioned, and I think the TPP, which he voted or decided to officially do away with yesterday, I believe. It seems to me, though, that a lot of these trade agreements had more to do with military alliances than they actually had to do with trade. So in some ways, I was sort of happy to see the TPP abandoned. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. There's always, the U.S. government ever since 1945 has considered itself to be the rightful hegemon of the world, the rightful emperor of the world, and it's going to make everybody behave like they ought to.
Yeah.
And they do structure the trade agreements so that there are benefits to other governments that claim to be allies of Washington.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's all part of the empire. The U.S. empire covers the world. It's the biggest empire there's ever been. And I think that, I don't know where to go with it beyond that. Just, you're right. But the trade restrictions might be the thing that worry me the most. Because this guy has a really shallow understanding of economics, and he really believes that trade restrictions are a good thing, that if he escalates the trade war that's incidentally already going on, there have already been,
sure.
I don't know, in the last 5 years or so, more than 600 cases of governments levying trade restrictions against each other. So the trade war is already going on, and he's threatening to escalate it. And what that means is he doesn't understand how international trade works. He doesn't understand how trade works between, let's say, Los Angeles and San Francisco. If trade restrictions are a great idea, why don't we have the governments of Los Angeles and San Francisco levying trade restrictions against each other? Right. He's really playing with fire here. You can make a really good case that in the Great Depression, it was the Smoot-Hawley trade restrictions that were levied at that time that turned a garden variety recession into the Great Depression. And I don't think he has any understanding of that. He may not even know what Smoot-Hawley was. As I point out in the February issue here, the Smoot-Hawley damage, the laws that did the damage, I should say, were pretty much wiped out by the Kennedy round trade talks back in the 60s. The politicians all over the world had learned their lesson that trade restrictions are horribly damaging to economies and they lead to war. And so they launched these trade talks that just opened up trade all over the world, and by, let's say, 1980, pretty much all governments were in favor of free trade. And now this guy, as leader of the world, as emperor of the world, he is coming along and saying, oh, no, trade restrictions are a good idea. So the lessons that were learned in the Great Depression and World War II have been forgotten. And if somebody doesn't enlighten that guy pretty fast, we're going to repeat that history.
Well, I don't doubt that. I'm afraid you're right about that. Currency wars, certainly it seems to me, though in this age of fluctuating currencies, that's another aspect of this too. And now we have a Treasury Secretary, a new one, talking about how, well, he, of course, when he was looking to be confirmed, he was advocating a strong dollar, quote-unquote strong dollar, which really means not weak against other currencies, not legitimately strong. But now, in the last day or so, he sort of has backed away from that and said a weak dollar is probably good for us in the short run. With just a minute left, Rick, any quick thoughts on that, and what should we be doing with our money now?
Well, for sure, I think you ought to be buying some gold and silver. I think that he, with the best of intentions, Donald Trump is going to do a huge amount of damage to the dollar, and I think that the precious metals, we've seen some strength here in them recently. I think you're going to see a lot more, and I really think that if we get into a runaway inflation, like I think he's going to trigger 2 or 3 years down the road, you're going to be so glad that you bought gold and silver today. So that's my main advice there.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it go at that. I should mention that Rick talks economics a lot. We talk geopolitics when we have him on here, but his letter is very, very good in terms of providing good investment advice as well. So you consider, folks, checking it out. Richard Maybury, let's see, I always forget, it's earlywarningreport.com. Check it out and consider subscribing to Rick's letter. Very reasonably priced, very great value for the money. So please do yourself a favor and check that out. Thanks so much for being with us, Rick, and we'll look to do it again sometime soon, I hope.